The ACT MS Symposium 2020. Lovely to see your happy faces again. It's a really nice thing to see the sort of Brady Bunch faces on the screen. So welcome again. First, I'd like to acknowledge the first Australians on whose land we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I live in Canberra, which is Ngunnawal country. So I'd like to welcome you all again today on day 2 from the whole committee. So you can see our whole committee's there. So even though I'm the face and the facilitator, we welcome you as a team. So thank you for coming. So this is Gut Health and Diet today with Helen Tremlett, Professor Helen Tremlett and Dr. Cindy Black. Helen's going to go first, which is super exciting, from Canada. And Cindy, unfortunately, couldn't make it today, but she's done a recording. So we're going to show her recording of her presentation. So we're excited about that. So tomorrow is exercise and vitamin D with Julie Davey and Robin Lucas. And then we have the symposium panel and the Our Health in Our Hands research update. So you need to register for each day individually, and we'd love to see you at the other days. Each session is recorded, so if you can't make it, you can certainly watch the recording later. Thursday isn't recorded though, so it's only a live presentation. Today will be recorded, except for the Q&A session. We won't record that. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat box. I'll keep monitoring them. Unfortunately, we're getting a lot of questions, so I'm not sure if I can answer them all or get Helen to answer them all, but we'll see how we go. So thanks for all the questions. They're very interesting. Please leave your microphones on mute until the question time at the end. As lovely as it is to hear your kettle boiling, we don't need to hear it over Helen's presentation today. As I said, add questions in the chat box, and I've already said that. So let me introduce the 2 speakers for today. So thank you, Professor Helen Tremlett, for coming all the way from Canada. It must be afternoon there at the moment, so welcome. So Helen is from the University of British Columbia. She is the Canadian Research Chair in Neuroepidemiology and Multiple Sclerosis. I was privileged enough to go see her and her team in Vancouver. Gosh, was that February, March? So it was lovely to see the team. Her program is funded through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the MS Society of Canberra, the MS Scientific Research Foundation and the US National MS Society, among others. She's trained in pharmacoepidemiology and multiple sclerosis. So that's Helen. There's, her research is mainly, at the moment is on MS prodrome, looking at safety and effectiveness of disease-modifying drugs in MS, etc. Helen and I are actually on a team working on a systematic review together as well. And the other speaker today, even though it's a recorded presentation, Dr. Black is a nutritional epidemiologist with a particular interest in vitamin D and diet and the risk of onset and progression of multiple sclerosis. So Cindy's had a lot of work with Robin Lucas, who's presenting tomorrow. She's a senior research fellow at the School of Public Health at the Curtin University in Western Australia. So, further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen so that Helen can get her screen up. And we're looking forward to hearing from you, Helen.
I'm sharing away here. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So I'm coming to you from Vancouver. You can see my screen okay, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to time this so I don't go over my 20 minutes. So I'm super excited to be here. I feel very privileged to be here to talk about one of my favourite research topics at the moment, the gut microbiota and multiple sclerosis. Picture here in the backdrop is actually where I did my run this morning along the waterfront in Vancouver. So we're lucky enough not to be able to get out for some exercise. So my focus here is going to be on giving you research insights onto where we are in terms of the gut microbiota and MS. And I think you'll see by the end that we still are in the research phase of looking at this very interesting area. I've got no commercial disclosures, but I would like to thank my funding bodies, and in particular the MS Society of Canada and the US National MS Society are currently funding my gut microbiota in pediatric onset MS studies. And I'm coming to you from Vancouver in Canada, so the picture at the bottom. So the broad overview today, I'd like to, I hope at the end you'll get an insight into the gut microbiota's potential role in multiple sclerosis. And I have 3 overarching questions. I'll briefly touch on what is the microbiota, what do I mean by that, what do we know, and I'll take a look at the evidence in multiple sclerosis and share with you some of our findings from pediatric onset MS. And then I'll give you a flavour of what's next. So examples of ongoing questions that people are addressing and ongoing research in MS in context of the gut microbiota. So I don't know how much of this is new to some of you in terms of the microbiota. It's been in the press obviously a lot in recent years. But in case you still haven't heard of this, so your microbiota basically comprises of all the microbes that live in or on you. So in case you didn't know, but even if you did know, think about this. It is insanely cool. But essentially, trillions of friendly microbes live in and on you. And in fact, if you like counting cells, you're only actually half human. The rest of your cells come from microbes, and most of them are in your gut. Here's a picture of some sushi. Why on earth am I showing you a picture of some sushi? Just to highlight some really cool things I think that people have found out about the gut microbiota in recent years. So when they sequenced stool samples, gut microbiota from people living in Japan, they were really confused that they found this gene in there that the gut microbes housed that normally was associated with being in the sea, being in the ocean. And then they realized that over millennia, the Japanese have acquired this gene from the ocean, and it lives now in their microbes in their gut, and it helps them digest their diet, which in their case comprises quite a lot of seaweed and so on and so forth. And you don't tend to find those microbes with that gene in, say, North American populations. Elephants. Why am I showing you a picture of a baby elephant? So you may have heard of the word coprophrasia, which basically means to eat feces. And this is just another cool example of the gut microbiota. So baby elephants, when they're growing up, will eat the feces of the herd to enable them to seed their guts with the microbes that the herd have, which then enables the babies, elephants, they grow up to digest the diet of the herds. So I think that's incredibly cool. Obviously, as humans, we acquire our microbes through different means, typically from our mothers at birth, and then parents and siblings or other people and things we're exposed to as we grow up. So did you know over 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut? We used to think this was only produced in the brain and spinal cord, but it turns out that it's in the gut, and it may be relevant to things like, say, mood and anxiety. Your gut microbiota is really important for producing vitamins for you, which you're not able to do yourself or get very easily from your diet. And your gut microbiota regulates your immune system or educates your immune system, which we think is really important when you're thinking about multiple sclerosis, which may be which is influenced by your immune system. So you guys all know that there is a connection between the brain and the gut. You've all felt that kind of butterfly-like feeling in the pit of your stomach when something good or bad happens. And you have actually a nerve that directly connects the gut to the brain, and obviously vice versa. But your gut and brain can communicate to each other in different ways, whether it's through the immune system or whether it's through these metabolites that your gut microbes produce. So this whole area is incredibly interesting. So what do we know in context of the gut microbiota and multiple sclerosis? Or put it another way, what is the evidence that the microbiota, and really I'm thinking about gut microbiota, contributes to MS onset or the MS disease course? So this is my very brief summary slide, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. First up, there are some really interesting studies that have been done in mice. Now, mice aren't humans, and they don't spontaneously get multiple sclerosis, but they can, there is a certain model in mice that you can look at that mimics MS. So essentially, researchers could take healthy looking mice, or mice that were running around looking perfectly fine. They could give them stool samples from people with multiple sclerosis, and if you did that, it appeared that you triggered this MS-like disease in those mice. Or put it another way, the mice started to have mobility issues. Now again, mice are not humans, humans are not mice. So what do we know in people with MS? Unfortunately, the evidence is fairly limited. So what do I mean by limited? Back to the same question again. Now, I like to be very specific when I think about my question. So just breaking this down, I'm going to show you briefly or summarize what the evidence is in humans, because humans get MS, and work that's been published and peer-reviewed. And I'm specifically looking for evidence where the gut microbiota or the stool sample or the poop sample was procured before the outcome was reached. And what do I mean by that? So let's say you were interested in, does the gut microbiota cause MS? So your outcome is, say, MS onset. Well, I hate to put it out there, but there is actually no direct evidence. What about the MS disease course? So let's say you're interested in inflammation, and let's say your outcome could be an MS relapse or MS attack. The evidence is really limited that the gut microbiota contributes to triggering an MS relapse. I've been involved in one of these studies that was published, and it's small, and I'll share with you briefly what we found, but it is a small study, and we're working on larger studies now. And there was a study from a couple of years ago that specifically looked at use of a probiotic, and their outcome was looking at immune markers of inflammation. So they didn't even look at actual MS attacks or relapses. And they showed that in 9 people with MS that they could change these immune markers once they gave these people a probiotic. So these studies are really small and limited. And what do we know about whether the gut microbiota affects disease progression in MS? Say your outcome would be disability. Afraid there is no evidence. So, okay, I don't need to go on too much, but just to put it out there, there are many other outcomes I think are really important and to look at in MS, and there isn't any evidence, I'm afraid, but you know, does the gut microbiota, does it influence, say, anxiety or depression or memory or those kind of outcomes? I'd love to know the answer, and we don't have any evidence. And I think that's important to think about when you're reading what's out there on the internet. So what do we actually know? What evidence do we have for MS? So I'm going to give you some insights what we found in pediatric onset MS, but it's nice to know that what we've observed is consistent now with what they're finding in studies of adults with MS as well, or broadly speaking, they're similar. So back up a moment, why on earth am I talking about the gut microbiota in children with MS? Fortunately, pediatric onset MS or MS in children and adolescents is really rare. It's really, really rare. But from the research perspective, it's a unique opportunity to look at what might cause MS or drive relapses in MS, partly because children haven't lived for very long, and so they've had fewer other life exposures or health issues. They tended not to have smoked or drunk a lot of alcohol or accrued a lot of other health conditions. So from the research perspective, it's potentially easier to uncover what might have triggered MS in those kids or what might drive the disease course. So I hope that makes sense. Like I said, pediatric onset MS is very, very rare. We think that less than 5% of MS occurs in childhood. I was fortunate enough to go down and work with a team in San Francisco who'd already collected stool samples on children with and without MS. So cut to the chase, what did we find? We found that the gut microbiota of children with MS was largely similar to children without MS. So I hope this isn't too, this is an analogy I'm using here, is thinking of a garden like an ecosystem. And my analogy here is a garden is an ecosystem, and it's kind of similar to your gut microbiota, or what's going on in your gut. So let's hope this works. We did not find that in the guts of our kids with MS, they had a devastated microbiota, you know, a bit like this garden, just nothing going on, barren earth, no microbes. We did not find that. So we found something more like this, where both the kids with MS and without MS seem to have flourishing gut microbiotas, flourishing gardens, or fairly diverse gut microbiotas. So I hope this analogy is working for you. But when we looked up close, so when we looked at this gut microbiota communities in detail, it's as if we could find more weeds in the guts of the kids with MS, or we could find more microbes that are more associated with inflammatory conditions relative to the children without MS. Now, this study, like I said, was small. Pediatric onset MS is rare, so 38 children. But it is nice to know that, generally speaking, similar findings are found in other MS studies. Typically, gut diversity seems to be fairly similar between people with and without MS. But like I said, when you look up close, you start to see that there are definitely different gut microbes living in the two guts, and of the people with and without MS. Okay, so I said that I was involved with this small study looking at whether the gut microbiota was associated with future relapse risk in MS. And I'll just say that preliminary evidence suggests that there is a relationship. We totally need to do a larger study. But for example, we found that depletion of a specific group of microbes, fusobacteria, although to be honest, the name isn't that important, but we found depletion of a specific group of microbes in the guts of children with MS was associated with earlier relapse risk. So in case you like your Kaplan-Meier curves, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but I'm showing you the Kaplan-Meier curve here on the left-hand side. We've got time along the bottom, and at time 0, which is when we collect the stool sample, none of the children have reached our outcome because we're following them over time. So we follow them over time, and you can see that in the children who are largely absent for this fusobacteria, oh, my cursor's gone, but let's just talk you through it. Over time, they were much more likely to relapse early, and that's depicted there by the unhappy red-looking face. So as that line drops precipitously, those are the kids that are relapsing really early on our study, whereas the green smiley face at the top are the kids that had fusobacteria, and they were less likely to relapse or relapse later in our study. So I hope that makes sense. Now, obviously, far too soon to crack open the fireworks, but they do look stunning over Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And absolutely, our findings here require confirmation, and we're working on that at present. So a word of caution when you are looking at the internet, when you're maybe even reading other studies in MS or what other people have written, most studies in MS have been very small, have involved few people, including the studies I've published to date. And it is quite sobering to know that as of July 2020, less than 450 people with MS have had their gut microbiotas sequenced and that work's been published in a peer review article. So we really don't know much here at all. And in most of the studies in MS, they have involved adults that have had MS for 10 or more years. So it's really hard to know whether the MS itself is causing the differences we're observing in the gut microbiota, or if the gut microbiota in some way triggered MS. It's really hard to tease those two apart. And this is a general word of caution, not just specific to MS. But I think it's really important to know that most of your gut microbiota, they're neither good or bad. It's very much context specific. And so you guys are in Australia, and I presume you all know, or at least this is still the case, that these are all invasive species in Australia, and they're not good. They're not good for Australia. But there's nothing inherently wrong with a European rabbit, as long as it's in Europe and it's in the right place. But a European rabbit in Australia can be quite devastating, I understand. So I hope that makes sense. There's no such thing as good or bad bacteria or gut microbes. It's where they are, it's their context and what they're doing that's important. So understandably, there's a huge amount that is yet to be discovered. For example, there are many things that can affect your gut microbiota, and we still don't fully understand all of these pieces. For example, where you live in the world can affect your composition of your gut microbiota, and there are very few studies published from Australia in terms of the gut microbiota. Your diet, whether you exercise, sunlight exposure, whether you've smoked, how much you smoke, what are the medications you take, and not just antibiotics, any medications can influence your gut microbiota for good or for bad. Whether you're constipated or not, it's perhaps not surprising to realize your gut microbes, like humans, like living in certain environments and don't like living in other environments. So some gut microbes thrive in a slow-growing environment, where you might get, say, in constipation, and others thrive growing in a fast-moving environment, which you might get with looser stools. And so, for example, we're trying to measure this in MS using this Bristol stool chart, which I'm showing you here. And yes, someone made this as a cake for someone's birthday. I think I'd be a bit upset if I got that cake, but there you go. I thought you might have, that might amuse you. So where are we next for the gut microbiota and MS? There's a huge amount going on. There are much larger studies ongoing in adults and children with MS. And we're going to try and, together, we should try and unpick all these different factors and how they influence the gut microbiota, and is it relevant for MS? So I touched on these things before, all these different things we do, sunlight exposure, exercise, diet, and so on. Some interesting questions my team and others are trying to tackle. What are your other gut microbes doing? So I didn't really make it explicitly clear, but most of the work that's been published to date has really looked at gut bacteria. It's actually much more difficult to look at viruses and fungi, but we think they're very important. So my team are trying to look at viruses and fungi and how they interact with bacteria in your gut. What are your gut microbes doing? Like I said, the name often of the gut microbe is less important than what they're actually doing, what their function is. Are they producing vitamins for you? Are they producing good fatty acids, these short chain fatty acids, which we think are good for health in general? They can prevent infections. They can educate your immune system. So what are they doing? How are they doing that? So with that, I have a lot of people to thank. Sorry to close this up with names, but it's a huge undertaking to do these studies, and we have to do it across multiple sites and centres. In case you wondered how we got the stool samples, yes, Canada is a large country, a bit like Australia, with not that many people, and we do use the postal system. So yes, we got kids and their parents to mail us their poop. That was a ton of fun. So with that, I will leave you with some pictures of beautiful British Columbia. It is a lovely place to be. We are very fortunate. I'm really happy to take questions. Don't ask me what the cow's doing. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. We love the picture of the cow, and none of us want a cake like that, I'm pretty sure. So thank you, Helen. I'm getting questions through the chat, so I'll email them to you while we all watch Cindy's presentation, which is next, and then we'll have the Q&A time at the end. Thanks, Toby. Anyone else not hearing that? Are you hearing that, Anne?
No, I don't hear anything.
All right, we'll just work out how we can hear it.
I'll then present some of the...
there we go. Thanks, Toby. If you can start from the start again, and maybe turn it up a tiny bit if you can.
Brief background about why it's the person today, but
Thanks,
hopefully
Toby.
you'll get something out of this presentation regardless. So I'll give you a brief background about why it's important that we talk about diet in relation to MS. And I'll give you an overview about the special diets, because people often ask what the special diets are and whether they should be following one or not. I'll then present some of the evidence around diet and MS progression. And I'll point you in the direction of some resources that might help you with healthy eating tips. So it was a while ago now that I did this Google search, diet to cure MS, out of curiosity, and there were more than 16 million results. So I was overwhelmed, and it's completely understandable why people diagnosed with MS are very confused about what they should be doing nutritionally. And just on the first page, these were the types of headings for the web pages. And many of the words here used are quite emotive. So things like cured, someone saying they reversed their MS, these are foods you should avoid, these are dangerous. Someone says a gluten-free diet is recommended. Someone saying that being a sugar addict led to their MS. So it's quite confusing for people who've been newly diagnosed with MS to know what to do and what evidence they can rely on. Now, Rebecca Russell is a PhD student with us at Curtin, and she ran a study where she spoke to people who'd been newly diagnosed with MS about diet, and most of them said they really didn't get much dietary advice from their health professionals, if any. Most of them were interested in the special diets, they'd heard about various diets for MS. Generally, they had difficulty judging the credibility of online advice and overall were frustrated by the lack of evidence. So for example, someone said she was following the paleo diet, but she found then that she couldn't go out to eat socially. So that causes stress for people because obviously eating is a very social activity. Someone else said, well, they were just told to have a healthy diet and that was the end of it. And she just wasn't sure, well, what was a healthy diet? And then someone else wasn't happy with the lack of dietary advice and thought, well, I'm going to have to research this myself because there's no authoritative information about diet and MS. So despite this, we know that many people do change their diet when they're diagnosed with MS, around 40% of people. And this is from a study in Australia and in other countries. So looking at the data from the Australian study, there were many beneficial changes made, like increasing fruit and veggies. But if you look at the bottom row there, many people did something that was not done by anyone else, actually, or by fewer than 5 people in that study, say. And there was a whole host of different changes made. things ranging from someone increasing tea and coffee and someone else reducing caffeine. Someone started skipping meals, someone stopped skipping meals. People were increasing and decreasing different foods. So it indicated that there is real inconsistency in the type of dietary changes being made, because really there is so much misinformation and there are no clear guidelines for people with MS. But we do know that dietetics is very important to people with MS. This is a survey done in Australia a number of years ago, where dietetics was considered one of the top 10 services required by people with MS. So we know it's important, and we certainly want to be able to provide more targeted guidelines around diet for people with MS. Okay, I'll move on now to talk a bit about the special diets, because some people may have heard of these various diets, but they might not be sure what they involve. So I'll talk about the four of the main ones. The Swank diet, which was one of the first, or if not the first diet to be recommended for people with MS. The Overcoming MS diet, which is George Gellenek's diet. The McDougall diet, and the Wahls protocol. So the Swank diet is a low saturated fat diet. Swank proposed this diet back in the 1950s. He was very keen on people reducing processed foods and full fat dairy. He thought people should get most of their protein from reduced fat dairy. He didn't particularly at that time restrict red meat or eggs. He thought people should eat at least 1 egg a day. And red meat, you could eat it every day on the Swank diet. But he was very keen for people to reduce saturated fat, mainly from these foods. So from whole milk and from all this range of processed foods that you see here. So things like pastries, pies, cakes, donuts. Actually, a lot of the things that today we still know these are processed foods, these are discretionary food items, and we should be reducing our intake of these foods. So the diet has changed somewhat over the last 50 years, because now it's quite low in red meat, and I believe egg yolk is restricted as well. The Overcoming MS diet, this is George Gellenek's diet, again a low saturated fat diet based on much of the information that came from the Swank diet, but dairy is excluded as far as I understand from the diet, and processed food, again, people should be avoiding those on this diet, and meat. There are different levels to some of these diets, and I'm not sure about what's involved in all the different levels. So someone who's read these books and are following these diets would have a much better understanding than me, actually, about the diets. So there might be some levels that are more lenient than others, but this just gives you a gist. The McDougall diet is a vegan diet, very low saturated fat. It doesn't need a lot of explanation. Mostly it's the animal foods that are avoided, but also processed foods. The same as with the other diets. The Wahls diet is the, slightly different one. It's a modified paleo diet. It's based on the protocol developed by Terry Wahls from the USA. So she recommends avoiding gluten, dairy, eggs, legumes, and again, the processed foods. It's not specifically a high protein diet. She considers it a sufficient protein diet, and it's very high in vegetables, around 9 cups of veggies a day. And again, there are different levels to this diet, so some levels might be more lenient than others. And what's interesting is when you look at them all in a table together, just to get an overview of what's involved in these diets. And I've put the dietary guidelines along the bottom there. So you can see straight away that veggies and fruit at the front of that table there, all of these diets are saying, yes, these are good things to eat. And if you look at the back of the table, all of these diets are saying processed foods are things we really need to avoid. So you can see that the Australian dietary guidelines along the bottom that's the most permissive diet. So it's not specifically restricting any foods or food groups, whereas the other diets all restrict various foods or food groups. And we really don't have a lot of evidence for restricting any of those specific food or food groups in relation to MS. And the problem with doing this is that it has the potential to result in nutrient deficiencies when you start restricting specific foods or food groups. And also it has the potential to cause stress for people. And you might get a situation, like I mentioned before, where you might be following a specific diet and then you feel you can't have friends over for dinner, you can't go to friends' places, you can't have lunch or dinner out with your friends. So it can create problems like that. And also financial difficulties, because it's quite expensive to buy certain special foods. Say if you're following a gluten-free diet and you have to buy gluten-free products, for example. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of an idea about what the diets are. I will just mention, before I move on to the evidence, a bit more about the processed food, because I think this is particularly important, because I've met people with MS who followed these various diets, and I have heard from people that they feel better on those diets. So whether it's vegan or paleo, for example. So it might be that there's something in common about these diets that is good for well-being. And just looking at this table, it could be that, you know, eating more whole foods, eating more veggies, and reducing processed foods, it could be key. And ultra-processed foods are becoming quite a hot topic in nutrition. These are foods that are mainly industrial ingredients. They're very profitable, highly palatable, they're marketed, they're convenient. Unfortunately, they're nutrient poor. And they have been linked with various health outcomes like obesity, heart disease, and cancer. I've done some very early analysis on an Australian study in relation to risk of MS, and we have found a link between higher ultra-processed food consumption and higher risk of MS. These are preliminary results though, so I'm not presenting them here, and that doesn't necessarily mean they would affect disease progression of MS, but it does indicate that there might be a link with ultra-processed foods and MS, as with other chronic conditions. So I've given you some examples there of some types of processed foods. The list is extensive, unfortunately, and it's a lot of things that people eat every day, like packaged breads and pastries and breakfast cereals and ready meals and processed meat and soft drinks. And if you do want a more extensive list, then if you Google the NOVA food classification, they have a reference sheet. It's just a nice PDF that you can print out, and it's the NOVA classification that defines what a processed food is. It's category 4 of that classification. Okay, so I'll move on now to talk about some of the evidence around diet and MS. So you can understand why we can't recommend at the moment a specific diet for people with MS. So this systematic review was conducted, well, it was published this year, so it's very recent. And it's a very high quality paper. And what the authors did was they reviewed, or they trawled the literature essentially for trials looking at diet or supplements in people with MS and looking at the outcomes. Now, they didn't include vitamin D because that's been researched and a systematic review has been conducted on that elsewhere. And there's a talk tomorrow on vitamin D, so I won't mention that. So basically what these authors found was 30 trials that had conducted a study in humans on either diet or supplements, and that's in people with MS. They were mainly supplementation studies. Most of those were either omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acids, some antioxidants. And there are only 3 dietary programs that met the selection criteria. So one was the McDougall diet, one was the Terry Wars paleo diet, and one was a Hot Nature diet, which is as I understand it, based on traditional Chinese medicine. And what they found overall was there was really little to no difference on outcomes for people with MS. So there's insufficient evidence at the moment to recommend any of these diets or supplements for people with MS. And that is why we can't recommend a specific diet yet for people with MS. So just to give you an idea of some of the types of research that have been conducted with the diet programs, the Terry Walls' protocol, which is a modified paleo diet, she ran a study with 34 people with MS, and she randomized those to receive the diet for 3 months or to follow a usual diet. And she did find improvements in fatigue and quality of life. But that's a really small number of people to then be able to say, okay, everybody should be following this diet. And there was a high rate of dropouts. So there were only 50% left at the end. So 8 and 9 people in those two groups left at the end. So when you think about those very small numbers, you can see why we can't say the evidence is conclusive about this diet. And quite similar for the McDougall diet, the vegan diet, 61 people randomized to follow the diet for 12 months or not. They found no difference in various outcome measures. They did see improvements in fatigue and BMI, but overall, small numbers. And in that study, the people in the diet group had higher fatigue at baseline anyway. So they were more likely to see an improvement in fatigue over time. So we can't really say that maybe the improvement in fatigue was due to the diet. So you can see that there are small numbers of people in these studies, and this is why we can't conclusively say that people should be following this diet or that diet for MS. But there's hope, because this topic has become of great interest to the research community over the last decade. And there are some very high quality studies being conducted at the moment. And so we should be getting much better results over the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. This study is being conducted in Australia at the moment. Currently recruiting, I think, called the Relief Trial. And it's a supplementation study where they are supplementing various nutrients that help mitochondrial function. So they are the powerhouses of our cells. They produce energy. And they're recruiting 150 people with MS. So already it's a much larger study than many that have gone before. Another study underway, this is in America, is comparing the Swank diet versus the Walls protocol. So a dietary program study. People will be following those diets for 6 months. They're hoping to recruit 100 people. Looking at fatigue as an outcome, along with various other outcome measures. So again, a bigger study than those that have gone before. And if you do a search on clinicaltrials.gov, this website records the clinical trials going on around the world. And there are 85 trials registered when I did a search for diet and MS. So really a lot of trials going on. And you can see some of the topics there, lots of things being investigated. So we really should start getting some very good results soon, because certainly 10 years ago, there would have been far fewer trials, if any, on diets and MS. So what can you do now, since we can't really provide very specific recommendations for people with MS? This is a lovely document that's been prepared by MS Research Australia, Adapting Your Lifestyle. And it covers lots of different lifestyle factors, including diet, and it's available freely on their website. And one section is diet. So we've briefly summarized the evidence around diet and MS. But overall, the message is to follow a balanced diet, a wide variety of nutritious foods, rather than excluding any key food groups. There's some nice resources on the National MS Society from the US. Denise Novak was a dietitian working for the MS chapter in California for 10 years. And she's made a nice video, it's about 8 minutes long, on diet for specific symptoms that people with MS might experience, like constipation, bladder control, obesity, fatigue, those kinds of things. And there are 2 documents, one on food and one on supplements. So they're all freely available from the National MS Society website. Of course, there's the Australian Dietary Guidelines, or Eat for Health, and they have some very nice resources available on their website, including a brochure on healthy eating for adults, the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating presented as a plate. And as I mentioned, I think one of the key things to remember is the importance of reducing the discretionary foods or the ultra-processed foods, which are in the very bottom corner, right-hand corner of that plate there. And we, as a population, we get around 30% of our energy from these foods. So generally, people could do a lot towards having a healthier diet by reducing these foods. And there's a very nice healthy eating quiz from the University of Newcastle. So that's available online, and you answer some questions and you will be sent a report about your diet, and it will give you some tips on where you might improve your diet and eat more healthily. Okay, so overall, I hope you can see that we just don't have conclusive evidence on diet and MS yet, but the area is of great interest to the research community, so there is a lot of work going on. There's certainly very little evidence to support following a special diet for MS, but the research is progressing. So the research is covering foods, nutrients, and diets. So hopefully we'll get some much more conclusive answers over the next few years. What's happening now is many high-quality dietary intervention studies, which I outlined from clinicaltrials.gov. And Rebecca Russell, our PhD student at Curtin, is designing a diet education program for people with MS. So hopefully that will help to provide the information that is currently lacking for people with MS. And she will be running a pilot study on that program next year. So big thank you to MS Research Australia for funding my postdoc fellowship, and MSWA for funding statistical support and Rebecca's scholarship top-up, and to my team at Curtin University.